No countdown. We're until
Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mark Borstein. I'm the CTO at Tremolo Security, and welcome to Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide. With me, I've got Scott Surovich. Scott, you want to say hi?
Sure. Scott Srowich. I'm a principal engineer, Kubernetes lead at a global tier 1 bank.
I thought, were we at the point where you could start naming names, or did they?
Completely. It takes an act of many gods to approve that kind of a thing. But like I said, not hard to find out where it is, right? But yeah.
And we're doing something a little bit different today. So far, this show, I guess we call it a show, stream, has been focused on the labs from the book. But, Kubernetes is always changing. There's always different parts. And so today we're going to have a guest, first ever guest. Hopefully we don't mess it up and we get people who want to come on. But we're going to welcome Dom Delnano. I'm saying that right? Delnano?
Yep, you got it.
So Dom is the maintainer for the PIXIE project, which is an eBPF observability tool, open source. And I know personally, I'm super excited about this because being an applications guy, eBPF is one of those things that like everybody knows it, everybody loves it, everybody talks about it. It's like the greatest thing since, sliced bread, but I don't really get to play with it very much. At the same time, being an authentication guy, I know what it means to be blamed for everything. And so I'm always looking for new ways to like be able to show my users, hey, this is what's going on. This is why it's not my fault. So I know I'm excited about this. So, before we give it away to Dom, Scott, you got anything you want to?
No, myself, obviously, I get blamed for everything, being a platform guy. And, you can call other teams in your organization and say, I think it might be this. They're going to say, nah, it's not us, right? So I need to have some observability. So I look more at the eBPF side for like network. Not just network, right? Added some security and stuff. And hey, we got Jack. Hey, Jack.
We got Jack. Jack and I were just talking earlier today.
Jack is a counterpart of mine. Works on my team actually, since we do want to, look at this more heavily. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've played a lot with it, but man, it's big, right? In a great way, right? When it can do a lot of things, extensible, just covers a lot of check boxes, quite frankly. And what we should, before hand it over to you, Dan, we want to introduce yourself and then go into the discussion.
Sure, I'll take it from there. So, hey everyone, I'm Dom. As Mark mentioned, I am a maintainer of the CNCF PIXIE project. I'm also CEO and founder of Cosmic, which my company is sort of building around the PIXIE ecosystem. But as they both mentioned, PIXIE is eBPF based observability for Kubernetes. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll dig into that a little bit. But essentially it means, you don't need to do any of the instrumentation on your part. You just install PIXIE and within a few minutes, you get all this valuable insight. And with all that, if you ever need to uncover any layer of the stack, PIXIE gives you kind of end-to-end system and cluster visibility.
So who's the target for PIXIE? Is it the platform people? Is it the application teams that are running on their stuff on cluster? Who do you envision as being the person who's interacting with this the most?
It's targeted at both, but it was actually developed as a developer first tool, which I think is interesting. So my background, I actually came from the SRE world. I was I was at Twitter and I was on the observability team, and we were building out, our metric system. We basically had this very, very high volume metric system, but we wanted to kind of evaluate eBPF and look into, the offerings there. And PIXIE was actually the thing that was most interesting to us. And so that's kind of how I got introduced to the project. But because PIXIE, really surfaces all of the Kubernetes metadata and pod services, and also kind of, as we'll see with the flame graphs, it really gives you visibility into your function calls and code. It really is approachable to developers, and our query language is based on Python pandas. So, a lot of developers are very familiar with Python and the pandas ecosystem. So I think from that end, it's a gentle introduction to kind of systems and performance to developers, but also from kind of the SRE, DevOps, platform engineering side, they're familiar with a lot of these metrics, logs, traces, the kind of pillars of observability. So it really caters to both audiences.
Awesome. Well, I want to say hello to Akansha. Thanks for joining us. Also, Omar. Awesome having you with us. Scott said hello, but he said it onto the YouTube, not the.
Oh, I thought I showed it in here, Mark. But,
yeah, I don't. I'm actually not sure if it shows up in all of them or not. It's the multi-streamer.
Yeah,
here.
that's fine. I don't trust it. I've always do that. That's a good point.
Yeah. But Dom, you've got something. You want me to go ahead and share up your screen and
yeah. Let's dig into our slides and we'll learn a little bit more.
So a little bit
PIXIE.
different for everybody watching is, normally Mark and I do our demos, and Dom will have some of this stuff, but to fully comprehend, I think, and appreciate this, we're not going to PowerPoint you to death, right? This is not what this is for, but there are some great speaking points on the slides. So we've gone through these, and I think they are very beneficial. So Dom, go ahead.
For sure. And to further on Scott's point, feel free to ask questions. They'll be very light on the slides, and then we'll really dig into PIXIE and the UI and see it working for some real applications. So, like I mentioned, PIXIE, eBPF, observability for Kubernetes. I already gave myself a brief introduction, but I've kind of been broadly working in the eBPF and observability space, most recently CrowdStrike and New Relic and Twitter. And as I mentioned, since being at Twitter, I've kind of been involved with the PIXIE project. So roughly coming up on 4 years. So here's kind of a view of what the different PIXIE UIs look like, but kind of the three most useful points to think about as we step through PIXIE is that it's auto telemetry, and that's meaning you don't need to go through and add open telemetry or add a library. We automatically start collecting all of this data for you, and we actually don't want you to change your architecture. We will figure out how to instrument things. The second thing is that PIXIE has this edge compute model. eBPF is a very high volume data source. And so we actually believe that it doesn't make sense to basically replay your network traffic to some downstream system like a database. So you actually have the ability to filter and process data on each agent node. And the last is the scriptable interfaces. All of PIXIE's capabilities are very batteries included, but removable. Our query language gives you a lot of capabilities, and also everything in terms of our APIs and stuff are very easy and off the shelf to consume, which we'll see some examples soon.
So go back to that real quick.
Yeah, sure.
That mobile phone you're showing, the interface is mobile friendly?
It is mobile friendly. I have not tried it in a while, but yes, I believe this is sort of a screenshot of the old UI, but I believe we have the same.
Okay, that's I wish we had. Hey, Kafka.
Kafka.
Yeah. One of our regulars, Dom, Kafka. Bonjour, my friend.
Bonjour.
Yeah,
I don't know, Mark. Looking at some network stuff on a phone, unless you've got a fold, I don't know. I mean,
I think that mobile interface is especially as the phones and tablets have gotten bigger and more. I gotta tell you, I've done quite a bit of operational debugging on those, even pulling out a mobile keyboard. I like seeing systems management applications getting more love on mobile. I really think that
I have to take a look at it. I haven't tried it myself. I'm gonna have to though. just
I've been using the Kubernetes dashboard on mobile for a while, and it's
I'm sorry.
It's usable sort of, but I got to tell you, it can be really freeing being able to unshackle yourself from a desk and say, maybe make this technology work for us. Poor folks in the field having to deal with stuff on a regular basis rather than having to carry a laptop everywhere.
So Mark obviously does not work for an enterprise where I don't leave my desk, but so for the common people out here, it's all good. But I do like that scriptable. I want to make sure when we get to that point, right? Because a lot of people at products today are going to go, "Wow, that's great, but can I do?" I'm going to say the answer is potentially yes.
Yeah,
and that's a great thing where I don't have to submit a request to like some huge vendor that's going to go, "Yeah, we might get to that in 12 months." You get something you don't include can be added within reason, right? I know there's a lot to that, but there's a question coming in.
Yeah. So Omar's got a question. I'll let you do this one.
For sure. Hey, Omar. Thanks for joining. So PIXIE's, we'll get into sort of the different types of telemetry it collects. It doesn't currently support logs. Really, we're capturing like the network traffic. And so what we're surfacing to you is basically all of the protocol traces. So your like requests and responses. We also support metrics as well, and then CPU profiles in flame graphs. And I think when we dig into some of the examples that I want to show, you'll get a better understanding of that. And it is a CNCF project. So,
Awesome.
the code is all freely open and available, and, we'd love to, interact and
what's the license?
Apache 2.
Apache 2.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna stop my rant on mobile applications and systems operation.
I will say in my past SRE life, there have been times, where you get an alert and you have your backpack with you, but if you just know you need to check something really quick, it is kind of nice if you don't have the restrictions to just glance at it really quick and know if it's the thing you really need to set up shop and get ready for when you're on call.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. One other thing I wanted to point out, it's a little hidden in this diagram, but this is a terminal in the back. And so you actually can, because we, all of our APIs are very tightly knit into the project, you can run all of these scripts and everything that's in the UI from the terminal as well. And so you'll get table representations, or you can put it out into JSON. There's a lot of flexibility there as well.
So there's a separate CLI then that.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So just so we have some common background, I wanted to just give a little background to eBPF. So eBPF is this basically virtual machine in the Linux kernel, and it basically lets you extend the kernel, but in a sandboxed way. So, you can be sure that your programs aren't going to cause kernel instability. And so it's basically created a whole wealth of observability and security solutions because you can rapidly iterate on it, but do it in a safe way. But the way you can think about eBPF is like a breakpoint in a debugger. So for example, if we look at this application code over here and this process REQ function, you can think if you set this eBPF program on this send pong function, when your application reaches that point and calls that function, the Linux kernel will then jump over and run your program. And then that will allow us to do things like count or increment a counter, in our case, we're also going to like, capture the network data and send it off for processing. But the main takeaway here is that eBPF is event driven. And so, we trigger on things like syscalls. So like when you're reading or writing to a socket, or when we need to kind of like profile the application, every so often we're just like capturing kind of the call stack of your application and then returning. So these things are referred to probes for that reason. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
So tying back to something you said earlier about how you don't want us as an application developer to have to instrument our code in order to get some observability. So I write some code. I wrote it right now, right? It makes some database calls, maybe makes some web services calls, etc. Everything over TLS. I don't have to do anything for you to see that I made those calls, because ultimately I got to go to the kernel anyway, because the kernel is what makes those connections together.
Yeah.
And now I'm getting that observability as an app developer without having to have your SDK embedded in my application.
Exactly. So there's basically eBPF gives us those hooks to these broad instrumentation points. And so, we can tap into TLS libraries, which is how we do our encrypted traffic tracing. We tap into, the kernel socket stuff. So that's exactly how it works.
So second question, follow-up question. Everything's encrypted. Can you look at the content of eBPF that's decrypted?
Yes, because if you're looking at the syscall layer, the data is already encrypted, right?
Right.
Like when it's written over the network, you can't understand it. But when you're tapping into the TLS library, you're reaching the data at the point just before it's decrypted or encrypted, or after it's been decrypted. So you actually can see the raw payload.
So does the security teams not go bonkers about this? Like the fact that everything's decrypted inside of this system?
So I like there's no breaking of encryption here. It's just in applications, in your process's memory, it's plain text, and we're able to kind of poke it at that layer.
Okay.
So we're not like breaking any security here. But the fact of the matter is,
breaking of security is this now a vector for attack? Like how could this be? Could this be, as an example, used to glean a password that somebody typed into their browser that I'm validating over LDAP to a remote system? What is that something that gets handled at the eBPF layer? Is that something that gets handled at the data collection layer, where you're collecting all this information? Like where in the chain does that data get separated out and tagged and potentially obfuscated?
Yeah. So you're right that PIXIE would see passwords, API keys, that sort of stuff. That's why we believe the edge compute model, this edge compute model that we talked about is so important, because not only is it good from a performance standpoint, because this is a high volume data source, but the data that might be sensitive is actually never leaving the node that collected it. And so we have capabilities to apply PII filtering or redaction as you query the data, but the data itself is not leaving unless you actually go query for it, and you can redact it before it gets served outside of the node.
So when you say in your edge computing model, you're not taking all of this data and then like Splunk or other time series databases, just piping it into a central database that then would get queried. You're actually keeping it on the edge and then going to query it as needed, so that way that minimizes the number of eyeballs.
Correct. And so
I get it now.
Yeah.
And Dom, I'm sure you'll cover this right too. And I was telling some people on my team this, that typically when you network troubleshoot, right, Mark, you're not looking at data that's 4 days old, 5 days, 6 days. You're real-time troubleshooting. And what PIXIE does today is, I believe, keeps 24 hours. Tom, keep me honest.
Yeah.
Data. So, because you're rarely going to say what happened 3 days ago. You're normally going to get that call, and something's slow. So we need something in the last couple hours. So you're not going to be able to go back and pull all of that anyways.
Right.
And with these high scale environments, like I said, eBPF's a kind of a fire hose. If you have a 10 gigabit NIC and your applications are saturating it, that's a lot of data. And so do you really want to pay for all that central storage of all of that things, even if we could send it while your NIC is saturated like that? Now we do have the ability to export the data, but usually people have are kind of filtering a subset, or they're not sending the full payload of the body of the request and response. And so that's where you can get kind of that longer look back. Yeah. But PIXIE gives you that high granular real-time view.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, cool. That's starting to make a little more sense in my head now. Thank you.
And one last thing I want to mention on eBPF, you mentioned the key point on this, Dom, right? You said Linux. However, Windows has been adding eBPF earlier this year, really, right? The eBPF on Windows project it started last year. Now it's nowhere near as full featured, but they are talking about getting some of those kind of counters in there. How it works, we'll wait and see. Right, and how long it takes is another story. But I would think at this point, I've never seen anybody support eBPF on Windows from Observability or that yet. Plus, it's not really built in. I think you added it at this point as a project. But it's out there if anybody was curious. But obviously, we're dealing with Kubernetes here. Primarily still Linux. Yeah, you can have Windows nodes, but primarily it's still obviously Linux dominant.
For sure. And that's really exciting. I don't know anyone in the security field. I'm sure you had heard of kind of the CrowdStrike blue screen of death incident that happened.
I was going to ask if you were part of that.
I wasn't. So I did work on the sensor, which is kind of the shared code base between Linux, Windows, and the other sensors they have. But they made a big push to move to eBPF because if you make a mistake or there's some bug, you crash the kernel. And so from the Linux standpoint, they've protected themselves by really moving the product into eBPF. But Windows, there's no like you mentioned, it's still kind of an up and coming thing. But that opens the door to preventing a situation like that, even though there's a lot of other ways you could engineer around that. So
this is where I kind of high profile on Windows. When people say blue screens, I'm like, yeah, it's nothing, not Windows itself though. It's an add-on that did that. But all you see is BSOD. And of course the Windows jokes start. So so we're digressing too much on this. I want to see more of the So
us digress.
So
yeah, no doubt.
So just speaking to kind of the architecture, this is what I was talking about when so each node is going to have a daemon set, and we're going to have our PIXIE Edge module, which is that in-memory database that it's taking the eBPF data, storing it inside of itself, and then through the UI, the CLI, or the API, you basically send your query through our cloud. That then has the ability to kind of kick off the query execution, which aggregates and collects the data from each of the individual PEMs, and then you get your results. So you get this, basically the query is actually being processed on that node, so you can filter down the data set to what you actually care about, making it very efficient. And so kind of the types of telemetry we support are kind of the table stakes, CPU, memory, and network. You get these protocol traces, which is basically your database queries, your HTTP requests, your gRPC requests, and the full payloads. You can really dive deep into issues, and then we'll also you can see how your CPU performance is doing with flame graphs.
When you say PIXIE Cloud, Dom, I want to make sure, because when we started talking to each other, right? I deal with on-prem primarily, so. Making sure everybody watching knows PIXIE Cloud, you can run this fully on-prem. So the term, of course, people sometimes just go, "Ooh, it's got to be cloud only," and I can't do that. Well, not true in this case, right?
Yep. So the open source project basically consists of the cloud, and then we call this part running on your Kubernetes cluster the Vizier. Both of those are completely fully open source. So you can either use the hosted option, which just gives you kind of an easy onboard experience, or you can self-host the entire thing yourself, as Scott mentioned. So a lot of flexibility in terms of however you want to kind of run and depending on what your organization needs.
Perfect.
So we'll dive into this more when we go over to the PIXIE UI, but coming back to this scriptable piece, I mentioned that PIXIE's query language is Python pandas based. And so this kind of gives it kind of first class like data analysis. And we also have kind of a little bit of machine learning capabilities you can do. But so what this kind of looks like is basically this data frame. You basically tell it, give me all of the HTTP requests that happened in the last 30 seconds. And then you can use this nice syntax to say, like, I want to know what the pod is. And then you return basically a table for each request and response. You get the pod, the request path, and the latency. And so all of the PIXIE UI is actually defined in this. You don't have to change it if you don't want to, because we provide a nice out-of-the-box experience. But it means that when you do need customization, it's very extensible.
So when I want to write this code, like how does PIXIE get it? Do I have to build a container that contains PIXIE plus my code? Is it an OCI? Like what's the artifact look like?
So it's actually just defined in the UI. And so actually maybe we could just pop over there really quick.
Yeah.
But so here is kind of the default view that you get. We call this kind of like the cluster, here's kind of the script name up here, but this is your like cluster wide view. There's this little script editor button here, there's actually like an IDE that provides writing that pixel code here. So if you change this.
As a dev, I actually don't like that. Because I like my IDE. I like to, I want to store things in Git. I want to version them. And we are an enterprise book and show. So, there's going to be questions from security, like how do we version, how do we, roll back, etc. So is there a way to be able to externalize that from storage within PIXIE, or does it have to be stored inside of PIXIE? Like, is there a way to pipeline? Like what's the way to kind of maintain that long term?
Yeah, so there is like kind of like a script bundle, and that's basically where all of these scripts are stored.
Okay.
You can make your own bundle. So like you could set up a process where like, you have your scripts and they get like, if you dumped your script bundle into an S3 bucket, you could then point your PIXIE cloud there and get it. So like that is definitely possible. It's just this allows you to in real time test out stuff, and then you can kind of propagate it to your script bundle later on.
And we got a couple of questions here. So Kafka asks, will PIXIE support Rust or Go in the future?
Hey Kafka, so PIXIE, the view we're looking at right here with this protocol tracing is completely programming language agnostic, and that's because we use eBPF to look at the network traffic. Now, when we look at the flame graphs in a little bit, that kind of has a little bit more per language constraints, but since Rust and Go are both like native binaries and native code, our flame graphs work for both Rust and Go. So both of those programming language are very well supported with PIXIE.
Awesome. And Jack's got a question. That is a great one. Each node has a memory database. If the nodes restart for a new reason, are the historical metrics still preserved?
So the historical metrics would not be preserved, but we do have this data retention section of the PIXIE UI. And there's basically a bunch of out-of-the-box stuff that exists, but you can configure sending it to whatever your OTel backend is. And so, then if you're exporting it every 5-10 seconds, whatever you configure, you'll have that historical record from there.
Awesome. All right, so we were talking about customization and you're showing off the integrated IDE and how easy it is to kind of build these custom dashboards.
One thing we didn't get to touch on with respect to that is there's actually two components to this visualization. There's the pixel So this PXL is kind of the name of our language, and we call it Pixel. But then there's this visualization spec that basically ties in the Python function and its arguments into the visualization itself. So those are kind of the two components. You change the Python. If you want to add like another widget, then you would kind of add another block in this JSON spec.
So this is pretty interesting. So like I'm an ISV. I'm an independent, independent software vendor. I got to talk to things, right? I talk to databases. I talk to directories. I talk to APIs. This sounds like this is something where like I could build some custom dashboard specific for Open Unison that I could then hand to customers and be like, hey, if you deploy PIXIE, use this, and then this becomes something that you can use as a starting point for, for seeing what's going on inside of your deployments. Am I kind of thinking about that the right way?
Absolutely.
That's cool. That's
I mean,
cool.
like a database latency, Mark, it might light up and you can see where that is.
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know why I think of that, but it could happen.
That's
but a lot
random
easier than, and this is why I'm a big fan of this, right? When I started playing with this, poor Dom on Slack was probably like, who the heck is this guy? He's hammering me. And I'm like, I got so many things I need to look at that are black holes, right? Kubernetes doesn't include this stuff. You just don't have this visibility.
Yeah.
And, you need something out there. And there aren't a lot of easy, free things to even start with, right? I mean, you want to start with that. It's just easier to me. But.
Well, and what I love about this is, and I haven't had a chance to get it up and running myself. So I'll say that I'm working off the demo here. So it could all be smoke and mirrors. I'll take Dom at his word. He seems like a perfectly reasonable fellow to believe. I love graph visualization, right? Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And as much as I love being able to pull up my CLI and do kube control get or whatever, you just can't convey that much information in a table. When you look at this, and it's kind of like when we talk about the graphs in Kiali when we do SEO conversations, right? Being able to see the traffic as it goes, seeing the connections, seeing the potential problem spots, you're just going to recognize things faster.
Well, colors, right? You got red,
yeah,
you got
right here.
Right
here we see, there's the red is telling us there's errors right away, and the thickness is telling us, higher throughput. So, you can really pinpoint, wherever you need to look next.
And one of the things I love also about this is that it gives you information that you might need during a debugging session, but you might have to go to somebody else to ask for because it's not easily bubbled up. So example that I'll give is how many connections do we have to the database, right? Like, are we saturating the number of connections that we have configured as a max for our pool? Or are we, do we just have a handful of connections that are waiting on things? Because those are two completely different avenues to explore potential issues, right? And if I can get something like that quickly out of a tool like this, that can save you hours of going down the rabbit hole and like, hey, let's get a DBA on the call, and maybe they know how to find that, maybe they don't.
Well, go even worse than that, or I'm going to say a little bit more than that, Mark. You want to know which nodes are hitting it.
Yeah.
Right? How do you do that without a tool that does this, where you might do some TCP dumps maybe on all the nodes, which takes you probably 4 hours to set up. And then
it has a lot of overhead too.
Yeah. And you're going to pull them in the Wireshark, right? Dumb and all these different ones maybe. And then maybe you know how to trace that way, maybe you don't. Right? It's not the easiest thing in the world, and it takes time.
Yeah.
And it's because I get this in the real world. People say, something hit our SQL database. We know what this node it was coming from. Do you know what pod? I'm like, yeah, no. Oh, how do I tell that with just Kubernetes today? No, I can tell you the pod was running, but I don't know which one made the call.
Yeah.
Right? That just doesn't. I don't see that.
Mhm.
And again, necessity. We had some TLS latency things that we had to try to look at in a production realm, and that's why I said, I just can't see it, right? And started doing my research and stumbled on this. Sorry, Dom, we're gonna let you go some more because we have 25 minutes, and I know there's a lot to still show. That this is great stuff, but there's so many cool things to get into.
I know. I just want to pop over the slides real quick just to make sure we're not missing any of the points that I wanted to touch. But yeah, so now we're going to kind of step into the different features of PIXIE. We kind of saw this already when we looked at the live UI, but all of these pixel scripts, give you different views and dashboards for what you want to look at. PIXIE supports 10 plus protocols. And as we talked about already, traces encrypted traffic. So, if you want to debug DNS, AMQP, HTTP, Kafka, PIXIE's got you covered.
SQL Server, TDS?
We do MySQL and Postgres, but not SQL Server.
Yeah.
But we, that's something we're always expanding, and we have a really nice. Sorry.
No, if anybody from Microsoft is watching, nudge, hint, hint. PR is accepted. Real quick, Omar's got a question here. So it's similar to Cisco App Dynamics in terms of customization and observability from dev perspective. I've never used App Dynamics.
I'm actually not too familiar with App Dynamics, but yes, it's in a very similar space. And
it does similar, yes, Omar. So I know I don't know AppD incredibly well, but you're also talking about this is much easier too, right? With AppD, you're usually doing a sidecar or some kind of an operator that's going to do something as well. So to me, this makes it even easier where we don't have to worry about that. I mean, AppD does have other features that do metrics and logging and other things, right? But if we're doing it just from a comparison on this kind of traffic, I'd say they're pretty much close. But I'd also say PIXIE does some things that doesn't do. So it's kind of a two-way street on that. But this is just so much easier where you don't have to install the add-on.
Yeah. And the demo that we were just looking at, we essentially just, sorry, one second. The only step I ran was to do PX deploy on my Kubernetes cluster. And then everything else that we're seeing got set up. So like it's very streamlined in terms of, just we want to make it, you getting visibility in under 5 minutes. So
almost like Istio with the sidecar. I mean, granted, there's still a sidecar, but you don't have to do anything, right? It just injects it, captures. There's no sidecar, so there's no overhead, no tweaking, no out of memories that happen with that thing. So to me, even better. And you're not just limited to mesh entries. Here, you got everything.
For sure. So next up on the data sources is PIXIE does performance profiles with flame graphs. And this helps you basically understand which code is kind of being called most and also like long running. So this is like the first tool you reach for when you have like a hot CPU problem. And then PIXIE also provides some custom data sources. So people probably from the more DevOps SRE side of things are probably familiar with BPF trace, which is kind of a command line tool for writing BPF programs. But PIXIE actually allows you to, so BPF trace is really kind of used from a single host standpoint. You can't like run it on your cluster, but PIXIE actually allows you to, basically send that script across all of your nodes. And then you can use the Python language to do analysis and aggregation. So it really takes BPF trace from like a systems performance tool to like kind of a Kubernetes first tool.
So Scott and I ran into an issue that I think we would have been able to solve a little bit easier here. So there was we actually triggered a bug in SQL Server's JDBC driver that was just spiking CPU on a single thread inside of Java. Is that something that would get picked up in this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Why don't we go back to the PIXIE UI and
And I had
Yeah,
to
that'd
do
be
stuff
awesome.
on host levels on this, Dom, to do some Java tracing, look at the threads, and then I could figure out exactly in say Open Unison, okay, here's where we're coming from on the thread. And it took, quite a bit of time to
Yeah.
do that. I mean,
You had to copy file, you had to generate thread dumps, copy it over. I had
oh
to
yeah.
analyze it. I mean, something like this is like,
Yeah.
wow.
So we call this like always on profiling. So instead of you having to kind of like kick off, a process where you like capture the problem just in time, this is always running. This is the feature that's a little bit more language specific, but Java is something that we support. I don't have anything Java running on here. We can kind of see from these stack traces that this looks like a Go application, but there would be
Oh,
like
I'll be
this
able to show this
little,
off with Open Unison soon enough. This
yeah,
this one's on
give it a
my
try.
this one's definitely on my I need to try this
Mhm.
list.
For sure. So like what's also nice about these flame graphs is usually like if you're familiar with flame graphs or you've captured them ad hoc, you don't get that tied into the Kubernetes or container metadata. And so what we're actually getting is basically an aggregate flame graph across the whole cluster. And so, we can see that this basically tells us this is running in the sock shop namespace. We know which pod it's coming from. And then the flame graph is stacked on top of that. If you're not familiar with reading these, the way to think about these is that the width basically tells us how long that function call was present or existed on the stack. And so that means you're either calling it very frequently or it's a very slow function. And so the way we would look at this is if this is, let's say it's like 70% of the screen width, that means that this service, like it's spent 70% of its time doing this function. And so if you need to optimize things or, make it more performant, you want to tackle these really wide towers instead of something that's much skinnier like this, because there's not much
So
meat to gain.
yes. So like going back to the incident that I was just describing, my pegged CPU would show my Java function, my Java method, and it would like dwarf everything else on the screen.
Exactly.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
That would have saved us a minute or two.
No
Yeah.
doubt.
Scott.
It would have. I actually almost thought it was a synthetic CPU metric too, Dom, right? Because I've seen that in the past. It's like it's not really
Yeah.
100%, but
Mhm.
it was.
Mhm.
And yeah, it took a lot of time.
Took a few. I mean, from when y'all first identified it to when I was like, okay, well, this is, is it, kind of thinking through, well, what's pegging the CPU? What could it be? What did we run into? Is this is this a thing where Java just likes to eat everything up? And so because you didn't constrain it, it's taking everything. No, that's not okay. Well, and we went through, it was over the course of a few days
Mhm.
until finally we got to the part where it's like, all right, do a thread dump. Let's see what we got. And it's like, oh,
Mhm.
this
Narrowed
code
it
is at
down to a
100%.
bug in the JDBC
Mhm.
from
Yeah,
SQL
and it
Server.
turned out to be
So,
a legitimate bug,
Yeah.
which is kind of fun, but also infuriating.
yeah, they're great when you know how to actually fix something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we're down to
also
15
think-
minutes, guys. I know there's so many. Sorry, I keep doing this to you, Don, but there's so many things in here. Oh,
Yeah.
live.
Nice. Well, you know what? I have a backup cluster, so
Oh,
we're
that's
gonna
just
hop
that's
back over
smart.
here really quick.
We got to do that, Mark.
I think I forgot to disable Kubernetes upgrades on that cluster, and it was a long running one. So that bites you sometimes. One thing I wanted to mention about these flame graphs is I feel like this is where PIXIE's developer first and also like DevOps applicability really helps but bridge the gap. Is like developers are familiar with their code and their function calls, and so even if you're not familiar with the service, like from an SRE standpoint, like I'd be able to read a flame graph and point out like, hey, I think this function might be I'm just picking something randomly here, but this I think is the problem. And then that allows you to go to the developer team and really point them in the right direction. It's like,
right.
It's not the network. It's not like Kubernetes doing weird things. Like we actually know that there's something going on in these specific functions, and it helps to facilitate that conversation when you're, in an incident or you're just like debugging or trying to like optimize, critical services.
Yep, totally agree. And this is one of the things I showed Mark when I even was talking about PIXIE, and I said, "Dude, you got to see this." Right?
Yeah. And so, I know, Scott, you're going to have to drop a couple minutes early today.
10 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're an enterprise show. We're an enterprise book. We talk about enterprise. What are some of the more enterprising, things like authentication, authorization, multi-tenancy? Are they there? Are they roadmap? Kind of where are some of the things around that?
Yeah. So we definitely are multi-tenant. You can see it. You can connect any number of Kubernetes clusters here. So your PIXIE cloud is basically your control plane for managing all of your Kubernetes observability. That also allows you to configure that like data retention I was talking about. You can opt all clusters into it. You can special case certain ones if you need different export capabilities.
How are you talking to those clusters? Do you have a service account that you're using? Or is it
we do JSON Web Tokens.
Okay.
And so basically that's all kind of automated under the hood. So there's API keys, and then basically then they're given a JSON Web Token. So I guess there's kind of a few different authentication schemes. Internally within PIXIE itself, we also use JSON Web Tokens. Sorry?
Short-lived, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. That's got to be Mark. JSON Web has got to be short-lived.
Yeah.
And I think when you say so, given the multi-tenant, the multi-cluster is awesome, right? Because you get the main control plane view. And I know this is coming, but I want to make sure I kind of mention it, or you're working on this, right? The team and right now, authentication is pretty much your admin, or you might get something lower, right? But you can see everything, and that's where the an RBAC to like an OIDC, right, will really come in handy. And I put you on the spot for that, but I know you mentioned that. There's something out there that's being worked on.
Yeah. So we already support kind of OIDC providers. But the piece that Mark's talking about is there's something I'm working on for understanding how to do RBAC. And really, there's like kind of the PIXIE API that needs some RBAC capabilities, but this full scripting language, like we talked about, you can query and access any of the data in the cluster. And so probably being able to like lock down specific columns of the data table, like, the HTTP, maybe the HTTP table, not everyone should be able to see the response or request payload. Being able to like have that fine-grained access is something people have asked about a lot. So that's kind of why I've been spending time thinking about it. So stay tuned for updates on that front.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing I like to really get into on this, Dom, is I hate to ask this, but click that script button, would you? No, I'm sorry. On all the things you include. So you got the script with
yeah, of course.
And I like putting this out. So as Dom scrolls through this, what this is I'm going to call them, for lack of a better term, included dashboards for a lot of interesting information. And I literally spent, I know, geek, sorry, I do have a life, believe it or not, but I spent hours.
Liar!
When I saw that. But, I'm a typical engineer. I see these cool things. I just start clicking like crazy and going, wow, that's a lot of information. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so diverse, right? I mean, one thing I thought that was unique, you talked a lot about CPU, network, all great stuff. But the exec table, I love. Something I did show Mark too. That's a black hole in observability today, right? You exec to a container. And people go, what'd you run? I don't know. Right? It doesn't work that way. Kubernetes API is not capturing all that. But
so sorry.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt. But so this is that one of those BPF trace integrations that I was talking about. So for anyone familiar with BPF trace, this is essentially what you would run from the command line. But in PIXIE's case, it's going to give us, the ability to see this across the whole cluster. So I'm just going to basically look at any Python commands that have been run.
That makes sense. That's why it does this deploy.
Exactly. Okay. Well, you know what? Well, I don't know what's running on this cluster, so let's not do a filter first. All right.
Yeah,
so
probably right.
Yeah. I got another question about the application of it. So like today, Open Unison, I bubble up metrics via Prometheus endpoint. And so I use the standard Prometheus Java SDK, which includes all of the, whole ton of information, most of which I don't really care about. And then things like CPU and memory and heap space and all that type of stuff. And then I add some additional metrics like, number of sessions, number of, total sessions, active sessions. I do, I will often make it so that I let Prometheus test my downstream stuff, right? So like if I need to talk to a directory, I need to talk to a database, I let the metrics endpoint, when Prometheus hits that metrics endpoint, I don't just do my own metrics. I add some metrics onto it for downstream stuff because if my stuff is broken, that's what people do, right?
Yep.
If the login screen doesn't work, it's the auth system. It doesn't matter that the database.
Yep.
And so bubbling that up. Is that something that is easy to do with this? Or is that like, how as an application developer would I bubble that type of information up to a PIXIE to be able to create a dashboard?
So PIXIE it doesn't yet allow like kind of ad hoc like metrics ingestion like you're talking
Okay.
about. But the you would be able to get the health of the database because any of the queries and stuff we would capture and roll up. And so
Yep, that makes sense.
you'd still get that broad visibility there.
Gotcha. So instead of saying, okay, when the metrics endpoint gets hit, I'm going to go do a database query to make sure that's still okay. You're going to see that syscalls are being made to this database and it's failing. And that's going to get that. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
Well, and look, not even failing, right, Mark? What if that was taking 45 seconds to come back? You're going to flag this,
right?
The latency. So same idea, not just down's one. I think down's easy, Mark, right? Because you go and look ping down. Latency is where the problem really is.
Right.
You see that, and
then you'd be able to see, is it all queries? Is it a particular type of query? And because you can see the raw query, payload itself, like it might help you pinpoint like, oh, maybe this is a table that never had an index. And now we're reaching kind of a data volume where like the index
we've never
scanning
run into that one, right, Scott?
It's like Donald tapping our phone or something, but it was, and it's very challenging. How do you find that normally a SQL trace, right, on the SQL side, which normally I don't have access to, right? That's not what I do. So it's I was always saying if I could see these calls, and I know what packet's going out.
Well, and kind of going back to the example of showing off trying to capture downstream metrics. In recent versions of Java's been doing this thing that's really mean. I don't like it, where it bubbles up a failure to trust a certificate as a connection error. And so I've got customers coming to me being like, it's saying you can't connect. Well, it can't connect. Can you do an open SSLS client? Yeah, okay. Oh, the certificate's been renewed. Okay, that's weird. Why did Java not tell me that it was a failure to trust? That would have saved me a lot of time. And so I feel like that's something that would get bubbled up here because it's different. At different layers, something else would fail. Like I would see quickly. No, the connection's fine. It's TLS.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up because TLS handshake tracing is actually kind of a newish feature to PIXIE. So you actually can see the handshakes and the protocol data, which is really nice.
That's amazing because trying to debug a handshake error in Java, especially if you're doing any kind of mutual authentication, is like I have Newton, the fingernails of a whatever. Like it's dark magic sometimes.
So I got to jump in
I've been doing
and
this
ask
for
this,
20 years.
because I got to go to the dentist.
Yeah.
I presume, but I got a question then, Dom, and I know kind of we talked about this, but we hypothetically, say I ran into a TLS latency issue on Nginx, and due to being a streaming engine, going from HTTP to streaming, I knew there was a TLS delay, right? We could see a 6-second delay in a TCP dump. That's all you're going to see in that, right? I mean, using PIXIE, I should have been able to get more information about that call easier, right? Because I should see maybe the incoming packet and I know where it's going from the payload. So a lot harder to get that in just a TCP dump till putting it in Wireshark, right? Try to read that from a text file. Is anybody can do that? That's impressive. But we couldn't, right? And I just, people ask me what caused it. I'm like, I can't tell you. I just can't, right? It happens. Nobody wants to hear that. But especially after the fact, I don't have that data. So that sounds like what you're saying is here, yeah, I would have been able to, and I've done the dashboard to play with this, right? I know I can click on it, I can see the payload. So I should have been able to see possibly the host headers, knowing what ingress it was hitting, you know, kind of pinpointing if it was 1 or 2 or whatever.
So I will say the TLS support is not enabled by default yet. So that's sort of like
makes sense.
Yeah, but we should chat more about that because I think this would be valuable for that scenario.
Yeah, and I could see something like that as Mark goes to security side, right? I always got to think about that. That could be one of those things that's a request to turn on and off potentially based on change orders, incidents, crisis calls. I don't know if that's kind of talking out loud. It'd be a great thing where you have to have an approval to turn it on, which and it flags, right? It's going to log somewhere, whether it's in Kubernetes API or somewhere saying, you know, Scott, turn this on. It should be a big blinking red flag right on cyber screen and go, oh no, he's okay. He's got a change for this. It's been approved.
You know, I actually feel like from a like security data privacy thing, like I don't see any issues with the handshake because the handshake is actually a lot of it's plain text. You know, you get like the SNI, some of those other details. And it's actually very low volume, right? Because you do like one handshake most likely, and then the rest of it is all application data. So
yeah, absolutely, you're right. Yeah. In that case, I was thinking more of a broader hit on that, but yeah, we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I apologize to everybody. I am going to like I said, my least favorite place, the dentist. So I have no choice but to leave. But Dom, thank you for this, and I'll let you guys continue.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Adios, Scott.
Yeah.
So,
but one quick thing on this BPF trace thing, I wanted to share an example where I use this because I think sometimes BPF trace or like tracing just like execs can feel like a little systemsy, but it's hard to kind of like bring it up to kind of the Kubernetes layer. So if any of you are familiar or run like, you know, cloud Kubernetes, like on GKE or EKS, you know, oftentimes there's like things running that are using different like, you know, API versions. And so, you know, GKE will tell you, hey, you have something using a deprecated API resource. When we upgrade you to the next version of Kubernetes, that thing is going to break. That was like this notification that I got. And the GKE logs were able to tell me that it was like, there was, you know, basically it bumped me over to the Google like logging product. And I was able to see that they knew it was a Python process, but that was it. That's all the information I got. What I did was I actually ran this script for a longer period of time because right now it just kind of captures data for 5 minutes, but I ran it for a much longer duration and I put a filter in here to only capture Python. And I was actually able to capture it and to tell like, you know, and it gave me the pod information as well. And what I realized was it was actually something that Google was running on my behalf. And so I didn't need to worry about it because they accidentally flagged something that they were going to take care of in the upgrade. Whereas I was worried that something was going to break. So I think there's a lot of capability here, and using BPF trace on its own without that federated kind of like deployment, you can't scale that visibility.
Right. No, that's, I mean, that to me is kind of the key is that, you know, you can, as an app developer, having to integrate an SDK just doesn't scale, right? Like it's a pain in the butt to update. It never gives you enough information. You know, one of the worst kept secrets in the enterprise security or the enterprise software world is the people who write this stuff never actually have to use it, right? Like it's pretty rare that you get an enterprise dev on some, you know, big company that uses it every single day. And, you know, there's a reason why people talk to the integrators when they need to understand what the heck's going on, because they're the ones that use it, as much, if not more, than the customers. And so, this idea that you're going to have a dev build this SDK into their code and then be like, okay, this is going to bubble up everything that people who use this thing every single day in ways that I can't possibly imagine. Right? Like, it doesn't work. But here, what's really cool is you've deployed something that I don't have to do anything. And it works. Like, that's crazy to me. I love it. Most
and that's
I'm not gonna lie, but I love it.
Yeah. We hear that sometimes, but we really we don't want you to change your architecture. We don't want you to change your applications.
Right.
You should just be able to understand them and get visibility into them with as little effort on your part as possible. So that is kind of one of our core principles.
And even forgetting, because a lot of times when we talk about Kubernetes, particularly Kubernetes, we're talking about, when I say we, I mean the blogosphere, the Twitterverse, the interwebs. We're talking about like micro APIs, stuff that we write for ourselves, right? Even at large companies, at financial, whatever. We're talking about things that we've written as developers, whether it's on a contract, we work for the company, whatever, but we wrote it internally. We have control of it. When we talk about enterprise, and this is the part that you never hear about, is COTS, right? Commercial off the shelf. You're not going to go instrument some commercial off the shelf system. You're not going to go to Oracle and be like, and even Scott, and Scott works at one of the companies that could go to Oracle and say, you're going to do this. And even Oracle is going to be like, no, if you pay us, we will. But, it'll be a massive customization and we're going to own you by the time it's done. And so that to me is the part that I love, is that from an operations standpoint, I can point this as a user, I can point this as a COTS system without, breaking that little piece of tape that invalidates the warranty, and say, hey, I can see where you're broken. Stop telling me that I'm the problem. This is what your problem is. And it changes the entire scenario, because now you as the owner and the operator have the ability to debug versus something's broken, let's open up a ticket with a vendor. It's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's we always tout that it's you don't need to, it doesn't need to be something you have source code to. And I'd never thought about it from the enterprise standpoint, but that's, one of the really great benefits of the PF instrumentation.
Yeah. So we're at the top of the hour. I'm sold, right? Like, you win. I'm sold. You got me. Where do I go? How do I get started?
Yeah. So we basically covered a lot of this, and I can also share a link to the slides. But so we have this website, px.dev. From there, you'll find our GitHub. You'll find all these other resources and our documentation. This is also our GitHub repo. How I got to meet Scott is Scott had showed up in our community Slack, where you will find me very active. But we are really community focused, and so if you go out, give it a try, want to just talk about ideas that you have, we're always there and happy to discuss things. So highly encourage you to join that and reach out. I also wanted to just kind of briefly highlight some future things that are coming down. We already kind of touched on this TLS handshake protocol tracing. Because PIXIE is this in-memory database system, people want more look back, but also, sometimes people want a smaller footprint. And I've actually been working hard on some memory optimizations. And so those are going to be coming in the next release. And then one thing, an additional application of those flame graphs we looked at, you actually can use that flame graph data to actually have a compiler optimize your code. And so what I'm currently working on is basically creating kind of like a drop-in CI/CD thing for Go, where you basically would have PIXIE query your profiles over the last like 24 hours. It'll feed that into the Go compiler because it's a supported thing. And boom, your application could automatically get like a 5 to 10% speed up. So I think there's a lot of potential there for unlocking that capability with like very low effort. Because oftentimes the hard thing is you need profiling data from production. Otherwise,
Right.
the compiler is going to make optimizations that don't get called, or it'll effectively like not gain you anything. So that's something I'm really excited about.
That's
Kind of
pretty cool.
blogging and showing kind of an end-to-end example.
And I guess my last question would be, so this is all open source. I can run it.
Mhm.
Who is the power behind this? Like, who is I think it started with New Relic.
So New Relic originally open sourced the project, and then they handed it off to the CNCF. New Relic has a few people that still work on the project, but I wouldn't say they're not employing any of the kind of core maintainers.
Gotcha.
And so my company Cosmic is kind of one of the big backers now, and I'm going to be kind of expanding the team soon. So we still have the existing maintainers who actually created the project, because like I mentioned, I started as an external contributor. But so we already have that kind of healthy base of people active and working.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Well, Dom, thank you so much. I had a blast. I learned a lot.
Same here.
I hope you had fun too. I know Scott is super excited about this project, and I understand why. I think what we're going to need to do is have some fun and actually get this thing up and running. So I think that probably not in the next week. See where Scott is. I know Scott had to make some updates to the next chapter's lab because things change so quickly in this business. But I think what I would like to do is just like, okay, here's a cluster. Let's get this thing up and running and make mistakes and have some fun. So we'll reach out and make sure that you get to be a bystander for that while Scott and I tear it apart.
Perfect. I love that. And thank you both for inviting me to come on the show. Today was super awesome. So
awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming in and saying hi. Special shout outs to Jack, Akancha, Omar, and Kafka for asking questions. And as always, if you have the book, please go to Amazon, give us a review. It makes a massive difference, especially if you bought it from Amazon. And if you have not bought the book yet, keep an eye out. It goes like a week at full price, and then Packet puts it on sale. I actually think I gotta double check. I think I got a message from them that if you buy it directly from Packet, they're selling it for like $30 for both the Dead Tree and the electronic version. And so get it for however's cheapest. I don't care if you buy it from Amazon. But yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you, Dom, and also thank you, Kafka, for the great session or for the great comment. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you. Bye.
Bye.